Welcome, Claudius. It's a pleasure to have you back with me. You know, the other conversation was very interesting, and the 7 steps and all the process to go through to be able to, to generate value. And this time, I like to give you the space to open up more of a specific conversation about a part that I believe is very pivotal to the whole process. So would you please take it from here, and I'll interject here and there as we go along.
Thank you, Davide. It's great to be back. Great to continue this conversation. So just to recapitulate, we introduced 7 steps, of which we introduced the first 4. So number 1 was to identify the problem space, sensory specific. What are you seeing with your own eyes? What are you hearing with your own eyes? How's it impacting you directly? Number 2 was identifying the meta outcome. What would be the greater outcome in resolving that challenge that you need to address, so that there's a motivation to get on with it. Number 3 was to differentiate between complicated and complex. You will remember that situation. Complex is most of the human situations are complex. And so this COVID crisis is a highly complex situation. Number 4, the critical element to where we want to pick this up again was to say, what is your own contribution to the problem space? And we were talking so much about your emotional approach to it, the energy that was informing your activity. And so I want to come back to that before we proceed. Number 5 will be, how do you map the agencies? Where are the areas to influence? Number 6 will be, then what are the creative activities you can begin to engage in? And number 7 will be the ongoing process of drawing the learnings, drawing the lessons. So if we go back to the emotional energy that is driving the response, we spoke about a proactive energy, you will remember, that was based on 4 experiences, and we emphasized appreciation, seeing the good. We said that that could be projected into positive expectations, expecting the good. We then saw that that would help to re-access one's own potential capacities and skills, enhancing self-confidence. And then we said the critical element was relationships. Who are you doing this with? And so those 4 components give a positive energy, give a positive focus, and help us to identify the opportunities to do something different, do something more creative. But what I just briefly want to do is to look at how we manage the negative emotions. Because in a time of crisis, that's natural. We get knocked off the bicycle, and it's natural that we have an emotional response to that. And so the first energy that I want to just address briefly is the frustration, anger energy. When we are faced with a situation where an outcome that we were wanting to achieve is blocked, like, for example, we want to go on holiday, but now we're in lockdown, it is natural to be frustrated. So our capacity to move is trapped by a barrier. So the frustration experience is an experience of being trapped. It is an experience of having a barrier to that which was wanted, desired. And the intensity of that is going to be really driving the adrenaline in our system. So it'll range from mild irritation all the way up to blind rage. And in this current situation, governments are having to be very careful about how they manage the mood, the frustration of their populations. So in this kind of situation, frustration is inevitable. What do we do about it? So I just want to give a basic formula. The first point that we need to do is acknowledge that we're experiencing what we are experiencing. I'm feeling frustrated. We need to acknowledge that. Because if we don't acknowledge it, we're going to act it out without others knowing what we're doing. The next critical element is to actually do a reality check. Is what I'm thinking to be a barrier true? And is that barrier possibly something that is in my own mind, in my own assumptions, or is there a genuine barrier in the context that I'm addressing? And so the best way to do that is to have a frank conversation with somebody you trust, and somebody that isn't going to just give you a ready opinion as an answer. somebody that explores your experience. So a generative conversation to get to the best approximation of what is real is in all cases the best starting point after acknowledging your experience. Having then said, okay, there is a real barrier. Now we start saying, what are the opportunities to work around that barrier? Do we wait? Do we break through it? Do we take another tactic? That's when the creative thinking comes in. So that's dealing with frustration. At the same time, in a situation like this, we have typically the experience of anxiety. So many people are concerned for their jobs. Yesterday, somebody did a delivery here to our home, and I saw him coming up the pathway, and he put the parcel on the step, and he took a photograph of it, and he kept his social distancing. And I said to him, "How are you doing?" And he said, "I'm being careful," but he says, "I'm just very glad that I still have a job." So there are lots and lots of people who have anxiety about their future financially. There's lots of people who have anxiety about how they'll cope if somebody in the family picks up the disease. So how do we deal with anxiety? Once again, it ranges from a mild sense of concern to worry, to anxiety, and it can go all the way to fear and phobia, the intensification of this. The important issue again is to acknowledge that. And the important issue again is to sit with somebody that you trust in a frank conversation and say, this is what I'm fearing, let's do a reality check. Now, in this current COVID situation, there's lots of disinformation. Lots of people are getting their information off the internet, getting it off Facebook. And lots of that is fabricated stuff. We need to discipline ourselves to try and get the facts. And one of the good ways of doing that is to actually consciously seek out the alternative story. Here's argument A, what does argument B look like? And so it is the reality check and then saying, okay, if that is the real fear, danger that I'm facing, that's the real threat or challenge I'm facing, then what are the best measures that I can take in preparation for that, and who do I do that with? And once again, that's where the creative thinking comes in. The next one is the issue of disappointment, that sense of loss. And so there's deep concern all around the world that economic opportunity has been lost, that businesses will be lost, that careers will be lost, that opportunities that people were basing their future lives on are no longer there. So the sense of loss ranges from a mild sense of disappointment, I can't go out today because it's raining, to a deep sense of frustration, a deep sense of despair. Now, the greatest threat in the sense of loss is the loss of meaning and purpose in life, the loss of a sense of identity. And that sense of losing the vision of the future has such a strong sense of self-identity. So loss, despair needs to be captured early, empathetically. If the situation is, I've lost this opportunity, then the question that we ask is, what is the value that you would have experienced in that opportunity? So dealing with a loss of a relationship or dealing a loss with an opportunity, the question is, what is the value that you would have experienced? And then if you can say it might have been companionship, it might have been excitement, it might have been financial security, then the creative approach would say, how can you replace that value? So in the case of the loss of a loved one, which so many thousands of people have experienced here in the United Kingdom now, over 30,000 people have died as a result. That means there are 30,000 grieving families. You can't replace that loved one. But what is the value that you experienced with those people, and how can I contribute to regenerating that value? Be it laughter, be it companionship, be it tenderness. And then the final one is aversion. That is when things go against the grain, when they run counter to our values. And so in the case of aversion, it's saying, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. It's not me. And there again, one has to say, what's the reality check? How bad is this? How long is it going to last? And what's my best way of coping with that and in whose presence? So in each case, we are looking at the emotion that we're experiencing. We identify that emotion as actually energy that is wanting to do work. Emotion is energy seeking purpose. And we are wanting to release that energy into, once again, finding another way to address the positive outcome that we're looking for, so that we are flowing the emotional energy rather than suppressing it. Because when we suppress the emotional energy, it's going to pop out in unforeseen circumstances in how we're acting, what we do, and have a negative consequence. And when we articulate it, interrogate it, when I say interrogate it, just gently let it tell us what it's wanting to do, then we can creatively find a way to flow that energy again into the direction of positive outcomes. And why I've shared this with you, Davide, and your listeners, is because we are so creative. Even when we are not intending to be creative, our activities have consequences. And so by being aware of our emotional responses and learning to self-manage those, we can direct our creativity from negative consequences to positive consequences. And I'm just going to stop there.
Now, you said so much, and you prompt me in many different directions, but let me take one of them, because I think it's the one that relates to me the most. Now, reality check and also the fact that basically when we usually think that circumstances are the generator of everything, of our frustration and what we go through. But what you're saying is, yes, you have to do a reality check and see the circumstance, yet at the same time, you're also saying you have to look underneath the circumstance to see what you want out of life, and then redefine the way you can get it, because the way you thought you were going to get it is not going to be possible. So to me, there's a yes, on one side, reality check is important. And let's say these crisis that we're going through, it's really interesting how reality check is possible to a certain degree, because we don't know where we're going to end up. So that the uncertainty of the future makes it even more scary at times. And so frustration and fear might be the natural response that we can get to it. Yet at the same time, when you talk about the death of loved ones, I love what you said about the fact that you don't recover that relationship, but you can invest in relationships what you miss in that relationship, that very intimacy. So one thing I'm wondering is, like, there are two levels almost that we're talking about here. One level is the circumstantial level, in which our emotions get prompted from the outside, and the circumstantial level, it's something that we sometimes cannot change, or we cannot twist, or we cannot really make it the way we want it to be. So just for the sake of understanding it, what you're suggesting also is, like, once you've done the reality check, you go underneath with where your emotions reside and what your wants are, and then you reframe everything such that you can channel the emotion in the direction you prefer, rather than suppress it, and by suppressing it, imploding, and by imploding, hurt yourself and the people around you. Is that what we're talking about? Because that's a real practical thing for me that could be a very good message to give to people.
Yes, no, absolutely. So in the approach of nonviolent communication, for example, in the approach of nonviolent communication, they say, for a moment, just suspend judgment, even of your own response. Suspend judgment and just see what is going on. Open your filters to what is going on. Be curious about that. Then after that, they say, identify the underlying need that is being affected. Exactly as you say. What is the need that I have? And then in nonviolent communication, they say, now articulate that to the people that can respond to that need in the form of a request, not of a demand, of a request, but in a way that they can understand the mutual gain that will be achieved in that articulation of the request. So there is that identification of the underlying need.
Yes.
Now, if we go back to Viktor Frankl, who is once again the superb example of the issue that you've just raised, of the circumstances. He made a statement, he said, between stimulus and response, there is a creative moment. And in that moment, there is the opportunity for choice. And so it is that moment, that opportunity for choice, that gives us the freedom to respond in the way that we would wish rather than react. Yeah. Even in whatever the circumstances. So from my experience, having met Nelson Mandela, having had that great honor to meet him, when he went into the prison on Robben Island, he was there for 29 years. And he had an attitude that said, I will take this opportunity and I'll convert it into a growth opportunity. And there's a beautiful story that when he was allowed for the first time to see his lawyer, George Bezos, who's still there, and the lawyer came to see him, and he was accompanied, Mandela was accompanied to this open field by 6 guards. And Mandela greeted George Bezos, shook his hand and said, now meet my guard of honor. And he introduced them by name. They were his guards. But in his own spirit, he converted that experience from being a victim into this is a creative moment. And one of the lessons of Mandela in prison is that they had to regularly change his guards because they were afraid he was going to subvert them so that they would go onto his side and not on the side of the system.
Wow, with kindness, huh?
With kindness.
Now, one thing I want to say, because this, let me go a little more. Let me focus a little more on one aspect that may be quite important and all that. There is something counterintuitive in what you're saying. You know, there is a moment in which I shouldn't do what comes spontaneous to me. And that is really where I'm looking at, because, you know, what comes spontaneous maybe to Mandela was like, these are guards that are holding me close down here. Now you have to make an effort, a counterintuitive effort to transform that. Now, how do you go from the spontaneous interpretation of reality that produces the frustration to the creative space in which you do something with it that helps you move forward?
Yes. So let's get really practical about that one, because it's so important.
Yes.
When I've done consultation in the engineering industry, in the construction industry, with a major South African construction group, they had a couple of accidents where people got killed. And they needed to really upgrade their occupational health and safety approaches. And all around, they then had the sign saying, stop, think, act. It is almost the willingness in the case to say there's something unusual, just for a split second, that moment that Viktor Frankl talks about, to say, just stop. And then typically what we used to say is take a deep breath and count to 10. Just take a deep breath, break the state. That is so critical, is that capacity to be self-aware that there's an instinctual response and just put that on pause, and we can learn to do that if we have pre-framed our thinking around that. So in the old learning hierarchy, you will remember this story that goes from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, so forth. We've converted that into a circular process. We call it the process and emergence tool. Most of our responses in our habits, most of our responses are habits. 90% of what we're doing is habituated. And so there's a difference between reactivity and responsibility. The ability to respond is the ability to be mindful about your choice. And so the ability to be mindful about your choice is also reinforcing your freedom. One invests in one's personal freedom and creativity by that self-reflection, by that self-awareness, by saying, stop, think, and then act. And simply put, in certain circumstances, there are things that we can do immediately. And in certain circumstances, that instinctual reaction is the only thing that is available in the moment. So if there is something that is an obvious no-brainer, do it. In certain circumstances, it's a no-brainer to get away. And so in lockdown, basically what we're doing is we're getting away, moving away from. But in other circumstances, we have to just sit and dance with the gorilla. I'm using the model of dancing with a gorilla because there was a gorilla in the zoo in Johannesburg where some robbers who were being chased by the police took a shortcut through the zoo into the gorilla's cage.
Oops.
And the gorilla beat them up and they shot the gorilla. But in that time, the gorilla survived and they were apprehended. And so the gorilla was named the policeman of the year in the Johannesburg press, Max the gorilla. So if Max comes into this little study of mine and he's in a mood, I can say to Max, get out. If Max doesn't get out, I can say, I can get out through the window. But if Max is still coming in and I can't get out of the window, I've got to learn to dance with Max.
Yeah.
And I call that dancing with you've got to dance with the situation until something changes, and it always does.
So would it be fair to say, and I'm just launching it out just to make it even, to add some practical parts to this conversation. Would it be fair to say that when I feel the frustration and the fear and those type of emotions, I better stop, think, and act? Because if I allow my frustration to create my reaction, then I'm going to go deeper into my own deep into my own self-destructive mechanisms, or into my fear that will bring me to something destructive. So whatever might be connected to my frustration or my fear, those are the signs that I need to stop, think, and act rather than just react. Because if I react, I tend to aliment my emotions and I tend to be part of the problem. As we said before, I tend to be a component that keeps the problem in place. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so let's think about what you're saying. We're going to go to creative thinking. Creative thinking happens from the prefrontal lobes of the brain. When we are in what we would call a negative emotion, and that is where the hypothalamus of the brain has been activated and the body starts secreting adrenaline, the flight or fight response. The prefrontal lobes of the brain shut down. Instinctively, we go into the reactivity. Instinctively, we go to instinct. And so that capacity to stop and break the state, to change the state, is the way to reopen the prefrontal lobes. So that's the first lesson. The first lesson is we need to acknowledge the experience and then self-regulate and change that experience. The second lesson, particularly at this time, is when we are in that reactive state, the immune system is alerted. The immune system is waiting for some kind of physical damage or some kind of invader. And that constant negative state is actually leading to immunosuppression. And so not only are we losing our creativity, but we're also reducing the capacity of the immune system to deal with its natural healing and self-regulatory processes. So particularly at this time of fundamental changes at a global level, of fundamental uncertainty, we want to particularly now to take the opportunity to learn how to self-regulate and to learn how to do that through creative, generative conversations with people that we trust, and to learn to regulate those conversations as well, as we said last time, that we are not focusing on the negative that just puts us on the downward spiral, but we're actually focusing on co-creating a new kind of future, Davide.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think, and that's the space of creativity. When you come in the space of breakdown with the desire of finding ways to generate the value in spite of, or even through the circumstances that appear to be adversarial.
Yes. So if you take, for example, right now, all around the world, people are doing all sorts of new things. I've just been following the media where they say telemedicine is on its way. Medicine is going to be at a distance. People are re-engineering their businesses. The manufacturing process has suddenly been re-geared from producing this kind of thing to using what they were doing to produce something else like respirators.
Right.
The complexity work for that is called exaptation, taking something that was designed for one purpose and redesigning it for another purpose. Right now, all around the world, we're going through a fundamental process of people finding ingenious ways. They say dating is going to be changing fundamentally. They say casual sex is something of the past. We're looking for all sorts of more online intimacies, which is quite an amazing thought when you think about it. So we're in that space now where we're being invited to find new ways of doing it. So what you need to do is twofold. The first thing is to identify where the agents that can be influenced. What are the resources that are available to influence the situation in a different kind of way? Those resources could be material that you have. Those resources could be new trends that are taking place, new developments, like everybody's going online with Zoom. That's a resource. Those resources can be new qualities of relationships that are taking place by attending all of these Zoom sessions. We need to identify the resources that are available, and then we need to identify which of those are the ones that are going to be, we can generatively engage with for positive influence. Financially, relationally, in terms of talents and competencies and skills, material resources, those are all the agencies. And then once you've done those, now you've mapped the dynamics, which of those are becoming more important, which of those are diminishing. And so you want to identify the trends. Remember, we spoke about that last time, emergence. You want to get on that wave of emergence. We're doing that right now.
Yes.
And then we go into creative thinking. So I'm just going to give you 3 different spaces for creative thinking. The first one is the dreaming space. It's the space where you actually just go crazy. You think of crazy ideas. So Albert Einstein was a master of that when he imagined sitting on the tip of a light beam and traveling through the cosmos. Now, for any kind of fellow, they would say this guy is on some stuff. But really, he was using his imagination that was going to unlock the mystery of the matter-energy equation. And so that creative space wants to be uncontaminated by trying to be realistic or trying to be critical. So that's the first lesson. Just think freely. Brainstorm without any critique. When you've got a couple of attractive scenarios, now you go into the realistic phase. How would we apply that into the world? So right now, we are working with a South African company, and they are having to re-gear their business fundamentally. One of the things that they're doing is to say, how can we actually safely get our workforce back to work? Because it's so complicated for the workforce to do their jobs in little homes with their children and families and things. And they're now looking out to roll out a whole antidote testing program right in the workplace. They're creatively thinking about what they can do. Then the next question is, how would we do that? What are the resources? What's the time? What's the investment? And when you've got, it could work this way, then the last process to go to is to critique, where can it go wrong? Now, what is typical in thinking that is fear-based or frustration-based is to focus on the where it can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What is typical, or more typical, in the envisaging a new opportunity space freely is to say, what is possible and how can we do it? So in that process of free thinking, allow scenarios to emerge even if they're creative. Then practical thinking, how would we apply this? And then your quality controls. Where could this go wrong? What would be wrong? That is so important at this time when we're not only fundamentally thinking about how we manage our own personal lives, but where at a global level, people are thinking how are going to be reconstructing our world going forward. I'm just going to park there.
Yeah. No. Just to sum it up at the end here, I like the fact that you go through the 3 steps. You know, one is free thinking, the other one is, you know, creating a possibility, a scenario, and then the third is to look at what could go wrong. And I think all 3 have value, but if you mesh the 3 together, there's no way to do each one fully. So the point is not what to do, but is when to do what. And I think that's a very good, that's a very, very good way to look at it, because it's not wrong to look at what could go wrong, but it's important to do it at the right moment in the right space, rather than trying to mix it up with my dreaming. Otherwise, I'm not going to dream and I'm not going to find real issues that I need to deal with. So it's very powerful to place it this way. And before I thank you for this, I'd like to, you know, ask you if we could have a further conversation just to close the process about, you know, how to transform everything into practical. And, you know, because I really like what you're saying, and it's dense. There's so much in every conversation we do that I like to chunk it up in pieces. So, you know, so far, I thank you for what you gave me, and even the examples and the richness of this conversation. And I'm going to ask you, if possible, to continue in the next one, just to close the whole concept and to give the whole scenario that we can actually propose and allow people to go through. All right. So thank you for now. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, absolutely. So what we can do next time is we can take Elon Musk as an example, because he does that creative thinking.
Perfect.
And then what can we do in our homes? Yes, it'll be a pleasure.
So thank you, and then we'll look forward to the exploration of the example of Elon Musk to bring it to our own life and interpret in our own situation what he's been interpreting majestically, I would say, in his own life. So thank you, Claudius. It was a pleasure being with you.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, goodbye.